The Donald Trump administration has recently authorized the first batch of military aid to Ukraine under a new financing mechanism established with NATO allies. The deliveries, consisting of 2 shipments valued at $500 million each, will be made through the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, PURL, a framework designed to facilitate the purchase of U.S. weapons for Ukraine, with the costs covered by other NATO members. This is the first time PURL has been used and also the first time new U.S. military aid to Ukraine has been approved during President Donald Trump's second term. So, what will be the impact of this decision on the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Reuters news agency, citing 2 informed sources, said that U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Elbridge Colby has approved 2 weapons packages, each worth $500 million, for Ukraine under the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, PURL, a mechanism established by NATO and U.S. countries to coordinate and finance Kyiv's most urgent needs on the battlefield. The White House has also confirmed this aid package. Although Reuters' source did not reveal the list of weapons provided, according to military analysis experts, Ukraine's needs remain unchanged compared to previous months. The new batch of weapons may include air defense, missiles, and artillery. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the evening of September 17 also confirmed that Ukraine will receive Patriot and HIMARS missiles as part of the U.S. weapons aid package funded by NATO allies. In the past, Mr. Zelensky has repeatedly called on the West to provide the Patriot system, one of the few types of weapons in the world capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, to protect Ukraine's cities and infrastructure from Russian attacks. Meanwhile, the highly mobile HIMARS multiple launch rocket system is guided by GPS satellite, so it has high accuracy and has been widely used by Ukrainian forces and plays a key role in attacking Russian positions. The US and NATO reached an agreement on the PURL mechanism from July 2025. This program includes Ukraine creating a list of prioritized weapon needs and sending it to the alliance. Partner countries will then transfer money into a special U.S. account to buy U.S.-made weapons and equipment for Ukraine. The ultimate goal is to provide Ukraine with $10 billion worth of weapons. Since August, many NATO member countries such as Canada, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden have committed to purchasing weapons for Ukraine through this mechanism. The PURL mechanism is considered a new direction in military aid to Ukraine as the Russian army is launching relentless offensives on nearly all fronts. However, can this mechanism truly bring Kyiv what it needs? The agreement on the PURL mechanism was announced by U.S. President Donald Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on July 14, and it is basically a continuation of what has become the modus operandi for Western allies since the Russia-Ukraine conflict broke out more than 3 years ago. That is, Europe sends military equipment they already have to Kyiv and then replenishes their own arsenals with new weapons, mainly U.S. weapons. However, the big difference now is that Europe will have to significantly increase its supply of weapons to Ukraine, as the Trump administration has so far only sold weapons to Kyiv or transferred aid packages approved by former President Joe Biden, without making any new commitments. On September 19, U.S. President Donald Trump once again reaffirmed his stance on this issue, stating that the U.S. will not spend more money on the conflict in Ukraine, but will instead sell weapons to NATO members. To some extent, Europe has ramped up production to fill the void. The Germany-based Kiel Institute recently noted that for the first time since June 2022, Europe has surpassed the U.S. in total military aid to Ukraine with 72 billion euros, compared to 65 billion euros from Washington. On August 5, 4 European countries, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden, announced they will spend more than $1 billion to purchase U.S. weapons to aid Ukraine. This is the first time a purchase has been made through the PURL mechanism. Specifically, the Netherlands will spend $577 million, while the 3 remaining Nordic countries will contribute $500 million together. The aid package includes Patriot air defense missile systems, anti-tank weapons, ammunition, and military spare parts, all of which Ukraine is short of in its war with Russia. However, how to quickly transfer military equipment to Ukraine remains a challenge. European countries are expected to provide 2 million 155mm artillery shells this year, and with Ukraine starting domestic production with Western financial support, the gap from a shortage of U.S. supply can be filled. But with air defense, it is different. Ukraine still needs U.S. weapons, especially Patriot surface-to-air missiles. At a press conference with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, U.S. President Donald Trump said that 17 Patriot systems could be ready for purchase for Ukraine. Germany has announced it will send 2 batteries in the near future, but it is unclear where the remaining systems will come from. 6 European countries, Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, Poland, Romania, and Spain, currently operate the Patriot system, but are concerned that sharing Patriot batteries with Ukraine will leave their airspace threatened. Both Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, the 2 main manufacturers of the Patriot, are ramping up production to meet European demand, but according to observers, under the pressure of continuous Russian attacks, Ukraine may not see the benefits anytime soon. According to observers, both the US and NATO have their own calculations behind the military aid to Ukraine. Obviously, the US is the biggest beneficiary, as ultimately, $10 billion will flow into the pockets of American military-industrial corporations, and the majority of the procurement costs will be shifted to Europe. Although Europe is paying, the choice of weapons, data linkage standards, and maintenance systems remain under strict US control, thereby indirectly undermining Europe's efforts toward strategic autonomy. All of this is part of a plan that has been carefully calculated by Washington, not only to help appease anti-war sentiment at home but also to allow the US to maintain control over Europe. However, Europe also has its own calculations. They hope to maintain US involvement so that the entire Western alliance will continue to support Ukraine, or at least not let Kyiv collapse on the battlefield. Therefore, even though European countries are fully aware that the US intends to shift the burden onto their shoulders, they have little choice but to accept this asymmetric arrangement. Meanwhile, for Russia, Moscow has long affirmed that the West's provision of weapons to Ukraine only prolongs the conflict without being able to change the final outcome. Along with the recent tense developments in the Eastern European region, the US approval of military aid to Ukraine is considered to be at risk of further igniting a dangerous confrontation between Russia and the US-led military alliance. The prolonged Ukraine crisis has caused increasingly evident spillover effects, significantly increasing instability in the region. Russia has long warned that by providing weapons to Ukraine, the West has entered the conflict. To date, a confrontation between Russia and NATO is still something both sides want to avoid, but recent developments are making the situation in Eastern Europe like a stretched rope. A series of incidents involving unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, are the main source of tension, as several NATO countries claim that their airspace has been intruded upon by Russian UAVs. It is unknown what the authenticity of the airspace violation incidents is, but the debate between the two sides is accelerating the arms race on NATO's eastern flank, which is considered the new front line in the confrontation between the world's largest military alliance and Russia. On September 12, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR, Grinkovich announced the launch of Operation Eastern Sentry. Denmark announced it will deploy 2 F-16 fighter jets and an air defense frigate, France will send 3 Rafale fighter jets, and Germany will contribute 4 Typhoon fighter jets. Polish Defense Minister Kamys stated that Operation Eastern Sentry could be one of the largest operations in NATO's history, aimed at establishing a layered air defense system and testing many new anti-drone devices and technologies. On September 14, Poland announced that President Nawrocki had signed a resolution allowing NATO troops to be stationed in Poland. The European Union also stated that it would consider establishing an EU Eastern Flank monitoring mechanism and a drone defense line. In addition to military moves, Europe is also actively cooperating with its allies to promote a new round of economic sanctions against Russia. On September 10, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that the EU is coordinating with partners to push for the 19th round of sanctions against Russia, focusing on accelerating the elimination of Russian fossil fuels and combating Russia's shadow fleet. Furthermore, Ms. von der Leyen also announced plans to consider establishing a financial mechanism based on frozen Russian assets to provide Ukraine with reparation loans, while stating that only after Russia compensates Ukraine will Ukraine have to repay the debt. Tensions are further increasing as both NATO and Russia have recently conducted large-scale military exercises along the border. From August 25 to September 12, Finland hosted the multinational exercise, Southern Griffin 25, focusing on the mobility and interoperability of NATO's special forces. At the same time, Poland conducted a large-scale military exercise, Iron Guard 25, with the participation of about 30,000 NATO troops. Russia has reacted strongly to these moves. From September 12 to 16, Russia and Belarus conducted a large-scale joint exercise of their strategic armed forces codenamed Zapad 2025, aiming to demonstrate the two countries' defense coordination capabilities. The most prominent highlight of the exercise was the powerful demonstration of modern weapons such as the Zircon hypersonic cruise missile and the Su-34 supersonic fighter bomber. The participation of about 10,000 units of military weapons and equipment, including 333 tactical, strategic, and transport aircraft, and more than 247 warships and submarines, demonstrated the immense scale of the exercise. According to observers, the large-scale exercise showcasing the military might of Russia and Belarus with the participation of thousands of troops is a tough message sent to NATO. There are still many obstacles to a peaceful solution to the crisis in Ukraine. The confrontation between Russia, the US, and the West is increasing. Although all sides still maintain a restrained attitude, not wanting a direct conflict between Russia and NATO to break out, the probing and manipulative moves are increasing tensions in Europe. In the context of both sides increasing their military presence close to each other's borders, a misstep or misunderstanding could completely ignite an unintended conflict, causing unpredictable consequences for regional and world peace.